open your phone, you scroll, and before you even realize it, your mood shifts. Someone's on vacation, someone's body looks better than yours. Someone just announced a win that reminds you of everything you haven't done. It's subtle, but real. You were fine a minute ago. Now, you feel behind, you feel less, you feel like you're missing something, and you don't even know what. Arthur Schopenhauer called it the most foolish thing a human can do. To measure yourself against another, not because it's wrong, but because it's pointless. Because comparison, by nature, is distortion. It compares your insides to someone else's outsides, your complexity to their highlight reel, your process to their result, and you will always lose. Even when you win the comparison, you become addicted to staying ahead, to always being more, to outdoing someone who isn't even watching you. That's not ambition, that's prison. Schopenhauer said this: "We are tormented by comparisons, and therefore by envy." The root of your unhappiness isn't that you're not doing enough. It's that you've forgotten who you are because you keep looking at who others are pretending to be. And that's the real danger. Comparison is not just a bad habit, it's identity erosion. You start to forget what you want, what you enjoy, what success even means to you. You begin chasing lives that aren't yours, goals that don't fit, dreams that never belonged to you in the first place. And no matter how far you go, how much you achieve, it never lands, it never feels like enough. Because it's not rooted in truth, it's rooted in lack. But here's the cruel twist. We live in a world that thrives on comparison. Social media is engineered to keep you scrolling by showing you what you lack. It monetizes your envy. It profits from your self-doubt. And the more you compare, the more you disconnect from your own center. You lose presence, you lose peace, you lose yourself, because you're no longer living, you're performing, you're curating, you're chasing a version of enough that always stays just out of reach. And Schopenhauer knew this truth before Instagram, before TikTok, before algorithms. He saw what we're only now starting to admit, that happiness doesn't come from being better than others. It comes from being undistracted by others. And that's the work, not becoming the best version of someone else, but returning to the truest version of yourself. Let's break this deeper. Why is comparison so addictive, yet so destructive? Because it gives you the illusion of control. If you just look right, work harder, win more, you think you'll finally feel worthy, seen, validated, but you never do. Because comparison doesn't fill the hole, it widens it. It doesn't heal your insecurity, it feeds it. You keep watching others not to be inspired, but to remind yourself you're not there yet. Not smart enough, not rich enough, not attractive enough, not liked enough. And the deeper you fall into this mental loop, the harder it becomes to know what's yours. What are your values, your goals, your definition of a good life? Schopenhauer warned that envy arises not from a rational place, but from an emotional wound. And when left unchecked, it will warp your view of reality. You start treating life like a scoreboard. Every friend becomes a competitor. Every success story feels like a personal attack. Every happy moment someone else shares makes you question your own. You don't see people anymore. You see threats. You don't celebrate your growth. You compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 10 and convince yourself you're failing. But here's the truth. You're not behind. You're just distracted. You've let someone else's timeline become the ruler for your own. And that's not wisdom. That's surrender. You surrender your peace. You surrender your joy. You surrender the quiet satisfaction that comes from living on your own terms. You become a mirror for everyone else's life instead of becoming a reflection of your own potential. But what if you stopped? What if today you muted the noise, not to run from reality, but to return to it? What if you stopped trying to measure your worth by the shape of someone else's path? Schopenhauer believed the key to happiness was detachment, not from people, but from comparison. Because when you stop comparing, you start seeing. You start noticing your own progress, your own rhythm, your own direction, and you realize the only person worth comparing yourself to is the version of you that you were yesterday. That's growth, that's evolution, that's freedom. But that shift doesn't happen accidentally. You have to choose it every day. You have to interrupt the scroll. You have to catch the thought that says you're not enough and ask, compared to who? Compared to an illusion? A stranger on the internet? A version of yourself you built from fear? That's not truth. That's self-abandonment. And today, you stop abandoning yourself. There comes a moment when comparison stops being background noise and becomes your inner voice. You wake up already behind. You look in the mirror and don't see yourself. You see a checklist of what you're not. Not successful enough, not lean enough, not far enough along. And that moment, it's where the real damage begins. Because now you're no longer just comparing, you're identifying with lack. You start to believe you are the gap. You stop trusting your instincts. You outsource your value to likes, metrics, compliments. You measure your worth by the spotlight others are standing in. And slowly, without noticing, you become a ghost in your own life, going through the motions, performing instead of living, achieving without meaning. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you can't become if you're always trying to match." Schopenhauer warned that comparison steals more than your joy. It steals your authenticity. It rewires your ambition, not toward what matters, but toward what's visible. You stop asking, "Does this fulfill me?" and instead ask, "Will this make me look successful?" And that trade, fulfillment for validation, is the slowest form of self-destruction. Because even when you win, you feel nothing, because it wasn't yours to begin with. So, what do? You stop chasing illusions. You stop playing a game that was never designed for your soul. You pause, you breathe, and you remember who the fuck you are. You remember the path only you can walk, the ideas only you can bring, the story only you can tell, not because it's better, but because it's true, and the truth doesn't need to compete. If this hits something real inside you, subscribe to Depthora and turn on the bell so we can keep stripping away the noise and get back to what's real. There's a concept Schopenhauer never wrote explicitly, but he lived it through his philosophy. Solitude is clarity, not isolation, not loneliness, but the kind of solitude that cuts through the noise. Because here's what no one tells you. Comparison doesn't survive in silence. It needs distractions. It feeds on overstimulation. It thrives when your attention is everywhere but within. But when you're alone, really alone. No scroll, no spotlight, no noise. You start to notice something else. Your own voice. Faint at first, then clearer. Not saying, "Be more like them," but asking, "What do you want?" That's where the healing begins. Schopenhauer believed that self-worth comes not from how others see you, but from your ability to live peacefully with yourself. And that peace isn't built through praise, it's built through presence. If you can sit with your thoughts without reaching for escape, if you can look at your life without flinching, if you can measure your success by your own values, you become immune to comparison. Not because you don't notice others, but because you don't need to be them. You've outgrown it. You stop living life like a stage and start living it like a meditation. You stop performing and start existing, and you begin to realize something powerful. You've always been enough. You were just too busy looking sideways to notice. Comparison is a thief, but only if you leave the door open. Close it, log out, mute them, unfollow the noise, reclaim your space, not because they're bad, but because you need space to breathe, to remember, to rebuild your own rhythm. That rhythm is where your power lives, not in reaction to what they're doing, but in devotion to what you know is right. And once you find that rhythm, everything changes. Your goals shift, your self-talk softens, your confidence stops swinging like a pendulum. You're no longer chasing validation. You're building alignment. You're no longer addicted to progress that looks good. You're choosing progress that feels right. That's real success. And it's quiet, almost invisible. But you feel it everywhere. Not in trophies, but in peace. Not in applause, but in freedom. That's the power of solitude. That's the cure to comparison. That's your return to self. Now that the noise is gone, what's left? You, raw, unfiltered, honest. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, that feels uncomfortable. Because comparison didn't just distract you, it protected you. It kept you from looking at the parts of yourself you'd rather avoid. Your unmet desires, your forgotten dreams, the guilt you carry for wanting more. But Schopenhauer didn't see discomfort as something to fear. He saw it as the gateway to freedom. True contentment, he believed, doesn't come from having more, but from wanting less. And that starts by understanding what you've been chasing. Was it truly yours, or did you borrow it from someone else's life? That job you thought would fix everything, that body goal you obsessed over, that relationship you envied. Were they actually aligned with your core values, or were they symbols you thought you had to pursue to be enough? Comparison often disguises itself as ambition, but not all ambition is healthy. If your drive is rooted in fear of being left behind, of being unseen, of being unloved, then no amount of achievement will satisfy you, because the wound isn't external, it's internal. And here's the truth most never face. What you envy in others is often a reflection of your own unlived potential. You don't hate their success, you're mourning your own self-abandonment. But that grief, that ache, it's not weakness. It's your soul trying to get your attention. It's saying, stop watching, start living. Stop comparing, start creating. Stop imitating, start remembering who you are. Carl Jung spoke to this too. He said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Comparison keeps you dreaming, wishing, scrolling, but awakening, that requires courage. The courage to slow down, to disconnect, to choose authenticity over applause. It requires you to stop performing perfection and start embodying your truth, even if no one's watching, even if no one claps, even if the only validation you receive is peace, because that peace is the real prize. And when you feel it, you won't trade it again. Not for attention, not for numbers, not for relevance. You'll choose yourself, not the version curated for others, but the version that breathes deeply when the noise stops. That version doesn't need comparison. It doesn't need to prove. It just is. So here we are. No more distractions, no more noise, just this, you, and the truth. And the truth? You've always been enough, but you were too busy looking outside to notice what was already whole inside. You kept scrolling, kept comparing, kept chasing someone else's version of success, happiness, beauty, meaning. But every comparison was a quiet betrayal, not of others, of yourself. Carl Jung would call it shadow displacement. Taking your unlived life and projecting it onto others, watching them live fully while you shrink quietly. But now, you know, you see it, you feel it. That comparison is a mirror, not showing you what they have, but what you've forgotten you already carry. Your power, your voice, your joy, your wholeness. And the moment you stop running, stop watching, stop measuring your life by someone else's mile markers, that's the moment you start living, truly, deeply, freely. Schopenhauer said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." But what if you can? What if you stop letting the algorithm write your desires? What if you remember who you were before the world told you who to be? What if you stopped consuming and started creating? Creating space, creating clarity, creating a life so aligned that you don't even have time to compare, because your days are full, your energy is grounded, your joy is internal. That's not a fantasy, that's a decision. And it starts now. Close the app, turn off the noise, come back to your own center, because the only person you were ever meant to become was you, and that is more than enough.